I'm Jake, 57, and the HOA fined me $3.200 for building a 6-foot plunge pool in my backyard, the very same plunge pool that had been keeping my PTSD under control. They called it an unapproved structure, unsafe for children, and a violation of aesthetic cohesion. But the real slap came during the monthly board meeting when the president, a smug woman named Karen Delaney, stood up in front of 40 neighbors and sneered, "This neighborhood deserves better than a military-grade water tank ruining the skyline." People chuckled. My stomach twisted. I'd fought wars in silence. But this being ridiculed in my own cul-de-sac for trying to survive something invisible felt more humiliating than anything I'd endured overseas. That small, cold water pool was my lifeline. I didn't throw parties. I didn't play loud music. I just needed to submerge when the flashbacks got bad, when the dreams clawed me from sleep like hands from under the bed. But none of that mattered to the HOA. Not dignity, not service, not even medical necessity. They fined me weekly. They published my name in the newsletter as a non-compliant resident. A neighbor I once helped move his grill wouldn't make eye contact with me at the mailbox. Another left a note on my truck windshield that said, "If you can't follow rules, maybe you don't belong here." I didn't ask for sympathy, but what I never expected was mockery, and certainly not to be punished for trying to cope legally quietly with trauma I never invited into my life. So when Karen said, "You have 30 days to remove the structure or we'll pursue legal action," I stared at the seal stitched into my old Navy jacket back home and thought, she has a committee. I have discipline. She has power. I have patience. And she had just declared war on the wrong man. But before I tell you what happened on that day, let me explain how it all began. Before all this nonsense with the HOA, my life was simple, quiet, predictable even. And after the career I had, that's exactly what I wanted. I spent 26 years in the Navy, most of them in a SEAL unit operating in some of the darkest corners of the world. I never liked to talk about what I did, and frankly, I didn't see the point. What mattered more was surviving it, coming home, and trying to stitch myself into civilian life without unraveling at the seams. When I retired, I bought a modest single-story home in a planned community outside of San Diego. Not the kind with lavish clubhouses or champagne brunches, just rows of neat beige houses and a promise of quiet living. The neighborhood was called Sierra Crest. Sounded peaceful. I'd pictured myself barbecuing with neighbors, planting citrus trees, and reading a book without one eye on the door. I lasted 3 months before the night terrors came back. Sometimes I'd wake up gasping, soaked in sweat. Sometimes I'd hear the whine of a helicopter in my dreams, only to realize it was just the ceiling fan. The worst was when I dreamed that I was still deployed and I'd wake up shouting coordinates, completely disoriented. My VA therapist, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Emily Tran, recommended cold water immersion as a supplemental therapy. She said it helped with regulating the nervous system, reducing adrenaline spikes, and managing insomnia. It sounded strange, but after the 3rd week of feeling like I was going to claw through my own skin at 3 a.m., I was willing to try anything. I didn't need a full pool. I wasn't looking to throw parties or install a diving board. I had a contractor build a 6-foot circular plunge pool 4 feet deep, low to the ground, with a filter and a chiller. It was tucked behind my privacy fence. I didn't even tell anyone I was doing it. The first time I stepped into it, I cried. Not because it was cold, though it was brutally so, but because for the first time in months, my body went quiet. The tension in my jaw unclenched. My hands stopped shaking. I could feel something reset. I used the pool every morning and sometimes in the middle of the night. Neighbors never complained. If anything, I kept to myself more than I should have. But healing for me wasn't loud. It was quiet immersion, a slow breath, a few moments where I wasn't waiting for a bomb to go off. And then Karen noticed. I didn't even know who she was at first. She lived 3 houses down. A tidy yard, a flagpole with a golden eagle, the kind of woman who waved when people were watching. She must have spotted the top of the pool from the walking trail behind the neighborhood, because one day I got a notice from the HOA in the mail. Unapproved structure detected. Remove within 14 days or face penalty. I thought it was a mistake. I genuinely did. So I emailed the board and explained politely that the plunge pool was therapeutic and that I had paperwork from the VA if needed. I figured it'd be resolved. Instead, Karen replied, "The HOA does not recognize makeshift medical claims for aesthetic violations. If it looks like a pool, it must be approved as one." That was the first time I saw her name. Karen Delaney. HOA president. I asked for a meeting. She declined, so I sent her the documentation from my therapist anyway. A full report from the VA, diagnosis, treatment recommendations, even a note from my general practitioner. She sent back a single sentence: personal health is not an exemption from community standards. It was like arguing with a wall made of smugness. I thought maybe if I kept using the pool quietly, it'd blow over. Instead, the harassment started. I got letters every 3 days, fines increasing. Photos were slipped into my mailbox showing my backyard from different angles. Someone I later confirmed it was her reported me to the city code office, claiming I had an unpermitted structure. Then the lawn service I'd used for a year mysteriously stopped coming. A neighbor told me at a block party, Karen said your house was under review for violations. Didn't you used to be military? I thought you guys followed rules. That one stung. I went home early that night, locked the door, and stood in the center of my dark living room until my breathing calmed down. I wasn't scared of her, but I was realizing something more dangerous. She didn't care who I was, what I'd done, or what that pool meant to me. To her, I was just another problem to eliminate. But what she didn't know was I wasn't done fighting. I just needed to shift theaters. If Karen had simply been annoying, I might have let it go. But this wasn't just about one woman and her clipboard of architectural violations. She turned it into a campaign and I became the enemy. Within 2 weeks, my daily life became a maze of passive-aggressive landmines. I couldn't take my trash out without noticing someone watching from behind their curtains. My mail began to arrive late, sometimes opened. One afternoon, I found a sticky note on my back gate that read, "Remove it or we will." No signature, just that threatening handwriting in angry capital letters. Then came the inspection notice. Certified letter. Official HOA seal. Due to multiple complaints regarding unpermitted aquatic structures, the HOA Architectural Review Committee will conduct an on-site evaluation of your property on April 3rd at 2:00 p.m. Presence is mandatory. There was no request, no consideration that this was my backyard. It was a summons complete with the implication that failure to comply could result in forced removal and legal escalation. I called the HOA office. No one answered. I left voicemails. No response. So I was home that day, sitting in a folding chair on my patio, arms crossed, wearing a plain black t-shirt, no insignia. No need to wear my past on my chest. I was calm, but I felt that old heat in my throat, the kind that used to rise before raids. Controlled rage, purpose. At exactly 2:00 p.m., Karen showed up. Not alone. She had 2 other board members with her. Doug, the nervous accountant-looking guy, who always nodded like his neck was on springs, and Valerie, the secretary, who wrote the HOA newsletter, infamous for correcting people's grammar, on Facebook. Karen walked in like she was entering a crime scene, clipboard in hand, aviator sunglasses, a polite cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Collins," she said, "thank you for your cooperation." I didn't offer it, I said, staying seated. She gestured at the pool, which sat in its little sunken space beneath the trees. Still, clean, quiet. "This is not an approved structure," she declared. "It exceeds the size limit for backyard water features and lacks the required 15-foot clearance from the back property line." "It's not a water feature," I replied. "It's a medical device." Karen chuckled. Actually chuckled. Let's not play word games. Valerie took photos with her phone, whispering notes to Doug, who scribbled furiously. I didn't say anything else. Just watched. They circled the pool like hyenas, poking at the pump system, pointing at the chiller box I discreetly installed. Karen paused and looked down at the water. "And you use this for your health?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "You're not a doctor." "No," she said with a sly grin, "but the board has the right to determine what's acceptable for shared visual space." That phrase hit me harder than I expected. Shared visual space. That's all I was to her, a blemish in her perfectly curated Pinterest-approved suburb. After 15 minutes, they left, giving me a printed notice of violation on the spot. The fine had now jumped to $3,200. Karen didn't look back when she exited my yard, but I swear I saw a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, like she thought she'd won. I didn't sleep that night. The dreams came back in waves, doors slamming, sand in my mouth, a chopper stalling midair. I woke up 3 times gasping for air. By morning, I sat beside the pool and dipped my hand in the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. It was so still, so unthreatening. And yet to Karen, it was the enemy. The next week, things escalated. I caught a teenager with a phone trying to climb my back fence. When I yelled, he ran, but not before shouting, "Karen said you were building a bomb." 2 days later, a utility worker came to inspect a water leak on my property, no leak found. No ticket opened, just another excuse to look around. And then came the kicker, someone called CPS. I don't have children, never did. But a child protective services worker showed up at my door saying they received an anonymous tip that a military man with emotional issues was keeping an unsafe pool near young neighborhood kids. It took 30 minutes to convince her I lived alone. She apologized profusely before leaving, clearly embarrassed, but the damage was done. Karen was testing my limits. I sat on the edge of the pool that evening and stared out across my backyard, remembering a quote from one of my instructors back at Bud is, "They'll come for you in ways you never expect. So always know your terrain." Karen was coming for me, but I was just getting warmed up. I started having trouble leaving the house. Not because I was scared of Karen. I'd faced enemies who shot at me from rooftops, who laid traps in alleyways, who would rather die than surrender. Karen wasn't that. She was something more insidious, persistent, socially acceptable, cruelty wrapped in HOA bylaws and perfume. But the truth was, I was tired. Every time I walked to the mailbox, I braced for another anonymous note. Every time I stepped onto the porch, I checked the street for parked cars. I didn't recognize people snapping photos from across the cul-de-sac. My body was tense all the time, a quiet hum of readiness I hadn't felt since active duty. Except this wasn't Fallujah or Helmand. This was my home, and that's what made it worse. The plunge pool, my one tool for centering myself, for managing the night terrors and the panic, sat still and covered now. The fines had stacked up past $5,000. The board threatened legal seizure. Karen's final warning letter stated that failure to comply with removal may result in HOA-sponsored demolition. They were going to destroy it, my lifeline. I stopped sleeping. The panic attacks came back in full force. One night I had a dream that my old SEAL team left me behind on a roof. I woke up disoriented and punched the drywall so hard my knuckles bled. When I finally got an emergency session with Dr. Tran, she looked genuinely alarmed. "Jake," she said gently, "this environment is becoming a threat to your recovery." "No," I said, fists clenched in my lap. "They are." She blinked, nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." And I told her the truth. I needed the pool. Not as a luxury, not as a backyard upgrade, as treatment. Plain and simple. That's when Dr. Tran did something I didn't expect. She took out a form, a thick one. "This is a functional treatment certification. I can submit this to the VA and your insurer. We can classify the pool as a therapeutic medical installation under Section 112 of the ADA. I didn't know the details, not yet, but my instincts kicked in. I'd been on operations where success came from paperwork, not weapons. Bureaucracy could be just as lethal. Still, it wasn't that simple. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back down just because of a few legal definitions. She had control, a taste of it, and like any petty tyrant, she wasn't going to give it up without a spectacle. The next week, the HOA posted a public bulletin in front of the community clubhouse, a laminated list of high-risk properties currently under compliance review. My address was in bold, and beneath it this line: unauthorized aquatic structure. Ongoing legal violations. Subject has refused multiple community resolutions. Subject. Like I wasn't a person anymore, just a case file. Neighbors started avoiding me. No more waves at the curb, no small talk over fences. Someone actually crossed the street when I jogged past, muttering, "That's the guy with the lawsuit pool." That one made me laugh, bitterly. And yet, even through the isolation, the shame, the steady erosion of peace, I didn't dismantle the pool. I covered it, waited, breathed through the panic, plunged my face in ice water when the flashbacks got too vivid. Because something was shifting. Karen had taken the first shot. But now I had paperwork, a medical team, a legal right. Dr. Tran put me in touch with a veterans advocacy lawyer named Melinda, a soft-spoken woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a memory like a steel trap. She reviewed the HOA's letters and immediately spotted 2 violations of federal disability protections. "Jake," she said, setting the files down in front of her, "you've got a case. A damn good one." I'd been told that before in briefing rooms and war zones, but this time it felt personal. "You willing to fight?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, but this time I fight with signatures." We started quietly. I wasn't interested in a dramatic explosion. I'd seen too many of those. No, this was going to be clean, strategic, methodical. The very thing Karen never saw coming. I didn't plan to break. That's not something I let myself do. But there's a difference between a man who's wounded and a man who's worn down, and Karen had spent months chipping at my peace like a crow picking at a corpse. It wasn't just the pool anymore. That was the symbol, yes, but the real target was me. The final crack came on a Monday morning. It was warm out, the kind of spring day that made the jacaranda trees along the boulevard shake their blossoms loose and cover the sidewalks in soft purple. I remember that clearly because I'd actually slept a full 5 hours the night before thanks to a cold bath and a kiddie pool I'd filled in the garage. Improvised. Effective. Dr. Tran had stopped by that morning to check in. Not a formal session, just a wellness visit. She brought coffee. We sat on the porch and talked about progress and strategy. I told her about Melinda the lawyer and how we were preparing a formal ADA complaint against the HOA. For the first time in months, I felt calm, like I had a plan that didn't end in destruction. And that's when Karen walked up. No warning, no appointment, just sauntered across my lawn like she owned it. She wore a blouse with little red cardinals on it and carried a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Collins," she said, "you failed to respond to our final removal demand. This package includes notice of the board's intent to take legal action." I stood up slowly. "This is a private conversation," I said. "You're trespassing." Our Tran stayed seated, calm, professional. Karen turned to her and said, "And who are you, his assistant?" No, Tran said, "I'm his trauma therapist, licensed by the VA in the state of California." Karen squinted. "Well, then maybe you can explain to him that trauma doesn't exempt people from the rules." I could feel my breath change shallow, sharp, but I held it together. Dr. Tran looked up, voice perfectly even. "You're interfering with his medical care right now, on his private property." Karen actually laughed. "Oh, please, I've read the reports. A glorified bathtub isn't medical treatment." That was it. That was the exact moment something inside me shifted. Not a snap, not a roar, just a quiet closing of a door. Karen didn't know it yet, but that moment, that smirk, that dismissal, that smug confidence would be the last time she'd walk onto my property without consequences. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten her. I simply walked to the mailbox and pulled out a large envelope I'd already prepped for Melinda. Inside, certified copies of my VA treatment plan, legal precedent case law, and a signed ADA accommodation request that she was about to receive anyway. I handed it to her. "You've now been formally served a medical accommodation request under federal disability law. Any further interference could be considered discriminatory harassment." She blinked. Twice. The smirk faltered. "Excuse me? You heard me. You've made yourself legally liable. You've been warned in writing. You've harassed a patient and his licensed care provider. And you've trespassed." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at Dr. Tran like she expected backup. Tran just stared, sipping her coffee. Karen turned without a word and marched off my lawn. Dr. Tran let out a low whistle. "Well, that escalated." "No," I said, "that ended." That night, I sat by the pool with a clipboard of my own, writing out everything that had happened, dates, times, violations, quotes. I included the CPS visit, the false utility report, the anonymous threats. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not just that. It was about reclaiming my space, my dignity. Karen had overplayed her hand. She'd let her control obsession blind her to the fact that I wasn't just some stubborn veteran refusing to play by her rules. I was playing by the rules, just not hers. And I had the paperwork to prove it. The first thing Melinda told me was, "We're not just going to respond, we're going to define the narrative." She laid out the plan like a tactician official. Letters, time-stamped emails, ADA documentation, escalation, procedures. We weren't kicking down the HOA's door. We were building a case so airtight it would choke them in their own policies. We submitted the federal ADA accommodation request through certified mail, email, and courier. We CC'd the HOA board, their legal counsel, the local ADA compliance officer, and 2 veterans' rights watchdog groups. Every document included a 10-day response window. Karen didn't respond. Instead, the HOA newsletter for the following week printed a passive-aggressive article about residents abusing medical exemptions to circumvent visual standards. No names, of course, but everyone knew. Everyone always knew. Melinda just smiled and said, "Perfect, that's retaliation, keep the newsletter." Meanwhile, Dr. Tran drafted a detailed letter certifying my condition and the necessity of cold water immersion as part of my prescribed treatment. She also included her license number, credentials, and VA affiliation. Then for good measure, she submitted a complaint of her own to the State Board of Behavioral Sciences about being harassed while rendering care. We were stacking dominoes. But it wasn't just about paperwork. Melinda had a second weapon, a man named Ron Santiago. Ron was a contractor who specialized in ADA-compliant medical installations. Melinda had worked with him on other cases, and after one visit to my home, he had an idea file for auxiliary medical accommodation certification under California Building Code, or 5B. This meant legally my plunge pool could be reclassified not as a recreational pool, but as a personal therapeutic device with the same protections as a hospital hydrotherapy tank. Ron took measurements, documented specs, filed the permits, applied for state-level certification. And once the paperwork cleared, the real twist came. My plunge pool now had a state medical device ID number. Karen had tried to remove a backyard toy. What she was now facing was the unlawful denial of a state-recognized medical installation. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I waited. Then came the HOA response letter. Written on official letterhead, it said the board had reviewed the request and found the structure remained in violation of Section 6.4, Uniformity of Yard Aesthetics. They rejected the accommodation and claimed the Americans with Disabilities Act did not override private community covenants. Melinda read it twice, then slowly placed it on the table like it was a live grenade. They just walked into a lawsuit, she said. We'll file tomorrow. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt calm. Like the tide had turned, and for once I wasn't paddling against it. Melinda filed the formal ADA complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Included were all the documents, the medical certification, Dr. Tran's statements, Ron's state permits, and every fine I'd received since Karen first discovered the pool. HUD acknowledged receipt within 2 days and assigned a case number. Now the clock started ticking, not on me, but on them. Karen, of course, tried to play tough. She posted another community-wide update about non-compliance with community standards under legal review and warned that the HOA's aesthetic protections must never be compromised. But there was a crack in her confidence now. At the next HOA meeting, for the first time, she avoided looking at me. She rattled through the agenda with shaky hands and glossed over my property and the violation report like it didn't exist. Meanwhile, I sat in the back row, silent, in a navy blue shirt with an embroidered VA logo. When the meeting ended, 3 neighbors I hadn't heard from in months came up to me quietly. One of them, an older woman named Rose, whispered, "My husband's a vet, too. Thank you for fighting her." I nodded, smiled, and left. Didn't say much. The real battle was still coming. But Karen had no idea that her paperwork war, the one she thought she'd win, with bylaws and fines, had just escalated into federal terrain. And in that terrain, I knew every inch. There's a specific kind of silence the night before a mission. It isn't peaceful. It's alert, waiting, listening for the sound of everything that could go wrong. That's the space I lived in for the next few weeks. Melinda was methodical. She knew how to pace the pressure. We didn't rush anything. Instead, we stacked leverage, not loud, not flashy, just steady. First came the local press, a quiet leak. A journalist from the San Diego Register who covered Veterans Affairs picked up the story. He didn't name me, but the headline hit hard. Disabled veteran fined by HOA for medical treatment pool. Inside was a photo of a plunge tank similar to mine, paired with a quote from an anonymous therapist stating, "When an HOA values uniform grass heights over mental health, something is broken." The article spread, not viral, but loud enough for the HOA board to hear the echo. Then came the complaint from HUD. It wasn't just a letter, it was a full investigation launch. They requested meeting transcripts, board decisions, Karen's emails, and documentation on all compliance actions taken against me. Karen responded with deflection, claimed I'd misrepresented the structure, claimed the board had acted in good faith. But the timestamped documents said otherwise. My initial medical explanation, submitted months ago, proved she'd been warned. Repeatedly. HUD investigators requested interviews. Melinda advised me to stay quiet, let the paper do the talking. So I did. Behind the scenes, I focused on rebuilding my routine. I started using the pool again under the legal protection of the new classification. Karen hadn't received an official injunction yet, so I kept a copy of the VA order laminated by the back gate just in case she showed up again. But she didn't. What she did do was panic quietly at first. I knew because one of the board members, Doug the accountant guy, with the twitchy nod, reached out anonymously. He sent a typed letter, To my lawyer, I want no part of this anymore. Karen ignored every warning. She said we should push until he breaks. I didn't agree, but she controls the board. Please understand she speaks for herself, not us. That was it. No signature, but enough for Melinda to include in the HUD packet. We had motive now, intent. Still, Karen wasn't done. She tried one last move. She called an emergency HOA meeting and proposed a retroactive amendment to the bylaws that would ban all water structures exceeding 3 feet regardless of use, and claimed it would not apply retroactively but was necessary to protect the neighborhood's visual brand. The board barely approved it. Valerie abstained. Doug voted against. But Karen grinned like she'd regained control. And that's when Melinda dropped the hammer. She walked into the next public meeting, in person, not just as my lawyer, but as a representative of both HUD and the California Office of Civil Rights. Karen's face froze the moment Melinda walked to the podium and calmly presented the signed ADA accommodation form, a state-certified medical device designation, copies of Karen's written denials. The Veterans article now posted online, a letter from the VA stating that the pool was prescribed and medically necessary. Melinda closed her folder, took a sip of water, and said, "The continued fines, harassment, and public defamation of Mr. Collins constitute a breach of federal disability law and discriminatory enforcement under the Fair Housing Act. We are filing for full injunctive relief and civil penalties unless immediate corrective action is taken." Dead silence. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then said too softly, "We were just following procedure." Melinda looked her dead in the eyes and replied, "No, you were following prejudice." A neighbor gasped. Someone in the back said, "She's done." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. It was already done. Melinda gave the board until the end of the week to issue a written apology, rescind all fines, and acknowledge the ADA violation publicly. The clock started, and this time they were the ones sweating. I went home that night and stood beside the pool. The water was still glowing under the patio light, and I breathed not like I was bracing for attack, just breathing. I didn't win with fists. I won with patience and paperwork and truth. The public meeting where everything finally turned began like the others, plastic chairs in straight lines, the same cheap coffee in the corner, and that heavy silence people carry when they know something explosive might happen, but don't want to admit they came to watch it burn. It was Thursday evening, 6:01. Karen was late. That had never happened before. She was always early, always poised at the head of the table like a smug CEO running a hostile takeover of her own neighborhood. But not that night. When she finally arrived, hair frizzed from the heat blouse damp under the arms, she didn't even offer her usual forced smile. She looked rattled, shaken. I took a seat 3 rows from the front, not to grandstand, I just wanted her to see my face. Calm, collected, present. Melinda sat next to me, neatly dressed in charcoal gray, her folder placed perfectly on her lap. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The other board members looked like deer in headlights. Doug avoided my eyes altogether. Valerie kept folding and unfolding her meeting notes, her hands trembling slightly. When Karen finally banged the gavel, her voice cracked on the first word. Meeting called to order. No one responded. She moved through the agenda as fast as possible, skipping entire topics and brushing aside community questions like they were flies. It was sloppy, desperate. Then came item 6, legal matters. Board response to AD complaint. That's when Melinda stood up. Calm, smooth, powerful. "Madam Chair," she said, not even glancing at Karen, per the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and on behalf of Mr. Collins, we now formally request the board enter the following items into public record. She read slowly, deliberately, the ADA accommodation request dated March 18th, the VA medical treatment plan, the board's written rejection, the published newsletter's defamatory remarks, the state medical certification for the therapeutic plunge pool, the board's failure to comply with federal disability law. The room was dead quiet. Some people looked stunned, others looked ashamed. Karen opened her mouth, but Melinda beat her to it. "Any statement you make now," she said, "can and will be used as part of the federal case file." Karen sat back, silent. Then Melinda said, "We also request the board issue a public written apology, rescind all associated fines against Mr. Collins, and initiate a reimbursement policy for any other resident with a qualifying medical exemption who has faced similar enforcement." A murmur rippled through the room. That was the twist Karen hadn't seen coming. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every veteran, every disabled resident, every person she had punished under the veil of community cohesion. Doug spoke first. "I vote to approve the motion," he said, eyes still down. Valerie followed. I second. Karen didn't vote. She sat frozen. And just like that, the motion passed. The board would not only withdraw the fines and issue an apology, they were now liable for every step they took against me, legally, publicly, and financially. When the meeting adjourned, I stood slowly, not triumphant, just relieved. Karen still hadn't moved, but as I passed by, she finally looked up at me. Her voice was thin. You could have just taken it down. I stared at her for a long second. You could have just listened. I left without another word. Outside, under the warm evening sky, neighbors approached me. Not in mobs, just in ones and twos, shaking my hand, some apologizing. One woman cried and told me her husband had fought in Iraq and struggled with PTSD too. I never knew what that pool was for, she whispered. I just thought it was a pool. I nodded. Most people do, until they need one. That night, I got into the plunge pool for the first time in weeks. I eased into the cold, let the shock roll through my chest, and then closed my eyes. I didn't hear helicopters. I didn't feel my heart slam against my ribs. I just breathed. The war was over. At least this one. Fallout is never immediate. It trickles, shifts, reaches further than the initial blast ever did. That was exactly how it unfolded with the HOA after that meeting, slowly then, all at once. Within 48 hours, the board issued a formal letter to every household in the community. I still have my copy. On behalf of the Sierra Crest Homeowners Association, we extend a formal apology to Mr. Jacob Collins for actions taken that did not respect or appropriately accommodate his federally protected medical needs. It went on to acknowledge the ADA legislation, the misclassification of my plunge pool, and the board's commitment to reviewing and improving future processes. But the line that stuck out, the one that finally rang as real, was this. The HOA recognizes the unique burdens faced by veterans and the importance of supporting medical care in all its forms. Karen didn't sign the letter. Doug did. Valerie did. But next to the HOA president line was a blank space. By Friday, that blank space was explained. Karen had resigned. She cited health reasons in her own announcement posted on the community bulletin board without any fanfare. No ceremony, no farewell message, just a clipped paragraph that ended with, "It has been my honor to serve." No one clapped. No one even took the notice down. The wind did that by Sunday. I found it halfway across the walking trail, stuck under a bush. Poetic in its own way. But what mattered more than her exit was what followed it. Change. Real structural change. The board, now desperate to prove they were turning a page, launched a community inclusion audit. They brought in ADA consultants, met with veteran advocacy groups, and revised the covenants to include medical accommodations not as loopholes, but as rights. More than that, they began offering reimbursement for any disabled resident who had been fined or penalized for adaptive equipment, accessibility renovations, or medically recommended yard modifications. The ripple effects were bigger than I expected. An elderly neighbor, Mr. Whitaker, had been fined a year earlier for installing a ramp for his wife's walker, a violation Karen claimed disrupted the natural slope of the front yard. He received a formal apology and a full refund within 2 weeks. Another couple whose autistic son used a sensory tent in the backyard were given a year of HOA dues, waived, in a thank you letter for their patience. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And strangely, that's when something unexpected happened. The same people who had looked through me at the mailbox, they started talking. Not everyone, of course, but more than I expected. One neighbor baked a tray of lemon bars and left them on my doorstep with a note that read, "Thank you for standing your ground," and for others who couldn't. For others who couldn't, I didn't reply. But I did eat the lemon bars. They were good. At the next board meeting, I sat in the same chair. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see it through. Valerie, now the interim president, called the meeting to order and looked directly at me when she said, "We will now vote to approve the Veterans Assistance Amendment." It passed unanimously. The amendment declared that all therapeutic installations, plunge pools, sensory gardens, mobility access features would be fast-tracked for approval with documentation from any licensed provider. It was policy now. Karen had used the rules as a weapon. Now those same rules would become a shield. Melinda called me that night. "You realize," she said, "you didn't just protect your rights. You rewrote theirs." I didn't say much in return, just sat on the porch watching the lights dance across the surface of my plunge pool, the water still and deep. The fight had cost me. My peace, my time, my trust in my own community. But it gave something back too. Control, dignity, legacy. And as I stood, barefoot by the water, listening to the quiet hum of the filter, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just relief, pride. I used to think peace meant silence. No noise, no conflict, no neighbors peeking over fences, no petty fines, no echoes of gunfire in my dreams. But I've come to realize it's something different entirely. Peace is presence. It's being able to take a deep breath without anticipating the threat. It's walking through your own front door and knowing you belong inside it. It's a plunge pool in your backyard, not because it makes sense to anyone else, but because it's what your body, your mind, your healing demands. After Karen stepped down and the board reversed every fine, I expected to feel triumphant. But instead I felt still, like I just stepped off a battlefield. Not victorious, not defeated, just alive, breathing, standing. And that was enough. Neighbors began to wave again, cautiously at first, then with genuine warmth. Some even asked questions about the pool, about the treatment. I didn't give them the whole story, but I answered enough for them to understand. It's amazing what honesty can do when you're not forced to hide behind shame. A few weeks later, a knock came at my door. It was Valerie holding a folder and looking nervous. "We're hosting a community wellness event next month," she said. "We'd like you to speak about everything, if you're willing." I didn't answer right away. Speaking publicly about my PTSD wasn't easy. Even the word felt heavy in my mouth. But then I thought about the neighbor with the autistic son, the Vietnam vet who lived 3 blocks down and never left his porch. The parents I'd seen helping their wheelchair-bound daughter over the curb because Karen once rejected their request for a ramp. Maybe it wasn't about me anymore. "I'll do it," I said. And I did. That Saturday, I stood under a pop-up tent in the park, not 10 feet from where the HOA had once held their monthly meetings, the ones where Karen used to read violations like indictments. Now people were sitting in folding chairs to listen, not to judge. I told them about the night terrors, about the plunge pool, about how it wasn't a symbol of defiance, it was a symbol of survival. I kept it honest, grounded, simple. No war stories, just truth. When I finished, someone started clapping. Then others joined in. It wasn't loud, it wasn't for show, but it was real. Afterward, a teenage boy approached me, said his dad used to serve and had a hard time sleeping. I gave him Dr. Tran's card and told him there were ways to help. I started sleeping better again. Not perfectly, trauma doesn't vanish, it adapts. But I no longer flinched when I walked to the mailbox. I didn't scan the horizon every time a car slowed in front of my house. The HOA even sent someone to repaint the fence they'd ordered me to take down during the height of the fines. Their way of making things right, I suppose. I let them. I still use the pool most mornings. I step into the water, slowly breathe, sharpen my throat for the first few seconds, then easing into rhythm. It reminds me that peace isn't comfort, it's earned, and I've earned mine. The legacy didn't come all at once. It came in small, steady ripples, the kind that change the shape of a pond over time. A few months after the HOA reversed course, something unexpected happened. I got a letter not from the HOA this time, but from a man named Marcus Chen. He was a veteran who lived 2 neighborhoods over. Said he read about my story in a local Facebook group. He suffered from severe service-related anxiety, had tried cold water therapy in a VA program, and wanted to build a plunge pool of his own. But his HOA had already told him it wasn't aesthetic enough. He asked if he could come by to see mine. I invited him the following Saturday. We sat beside the pool, drinking coffee, as I explained the system, the chiller unit, the permits, the maintenance. But more than that, I told him the story, the whole thing. No filters. He listened, took notes, thanked me with a handshake that felt different. Not the casual kind, but the kind 2 people give each other when they both know what silence costs. A week later, I helped him write his first ADA accommodation request. Then another vet reached out, and another. I started compiling a short guide. Nothing fancy, just a 6-page PDF with step sample letters and tips for working within HOA policy. I sent it to Melinda to make sure it held legal weight. She added citations. Dr. Tran added a mental health preface. Ron, the contractor, gave design specs for making plunge pools ADA compliant. We called it Quiet Depths, a veteran's guide to therapeutic water access. It wasn't a business, it wasn't a movement. It was a tool, just like the pool. Soon we partnered with a local nonprofit to offer a small reimbursement grant for veterans looking to build plunge pools or sensory water features. The first one went to a retired Marine in Chula Vista. He sent me a photo of his backyard gravel patio, palm trees, and a brand new plunge tank tucked between them. He wrote, "First full night of sleep in 8 months. Thank you, brother." And so what started as one man's fight became something much more enduring. The HOA, now under new leadership, took it even further. They added a line to the official bylaws. Sierra Crest proudly recognizes the medical needs of veterans and individuals with disabilities. Accommodations shall not be merely permitted, they shall be protected. That line wasn't mine, but the path to it was. Sometimes I still wake up in the dark, startled by dreams I don't remember. But now I have a rhythm. Swing legs out of bed, walk barefoot across the cool tile, step into the plunge pool, inhale. Let the water take it, and I remember my house is quiet. My yard is mine. My story didn't end with a fine. It ended with legacy, one made of water, steel, and patience, and it ripples still. I never planned to become an advocate. I never wanted to stand in front of crowds or draft legal guides or field late-night emails from strangers who knew my pain before they knew my name. All I wanted was peace. But sometimes peace is something you build, not something you find. Sometimes it starts as a small circle of still water in your own backyard, and it spreads, touching people you'll never meet, changing rules you never wrote, healing wounds you didn't even know were still open. When Karen tried to take that from me, she thought she was fighting a man. What she didn't realize was that she was fighting everything I had already survived. I didn't get revenge in the traditional sense. There were no handcuffs, no courtroom drama, no screaming matches. My victory was colder, quieter. It was a folded letter of apology, a bylaw rewritten, a child's ramp left untouched, a veteran's pool filled and blessed by silence. It was seeing neighbors step out of fear and into compassion, not just for me, but for each other. The real win wasn't proving Karen wrong. It was proving that a person's dignity is not negotiable, that healing doesn't need to be attractive or polite or approved by committee, that sometimes survival looks like a man sitting quietly in a plunge pool at sunrise, knowing that for once he doesn't have to fight to stay afloat. That's the legacy I leave behind in Sierra Crest. A community that learned to look past fences and fine print. A set of tools passed from one pair of calloused hands to the next. A blueprint for making space, real physical space for those who carry invisible weight. So no, I'm not angry anymore. I'm proud. And if someone tries to take your peace in the form of roses, fences, therapy pools, or the quiet rituals that keep you whole, I hope you remember my story. I hope you remember that power doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like still water, and a man brave enough to step into it. A few weeks after the HOA drama settled, when things had finally started to feel normal again, a new kind of conflict found its way to my doorstep. It wasn't from a board member or a certified letter. This time it came in the form of a kid, maybe 14, maybe 15, tall, lanky, all elbows and nervous glances. He knocked on my door one late afternoon while I was trimming the lemon tree out front. When I opened the gate, he took a step back, like he thought I might yell at him. I recognized him as the same kid who had once tried to peek over my fence when Karen's campaign against me was at its worst. He stood there holding a broken drone in both hands. "I think this belongs to you," he said. I looked at the drone. It was cheap, probably a birthday gift. One of the plastic ones with a tiny camera on the front. The casing was cracked, propellers missing. I recognized it immediately. 3 months earlier, that same drone had buzzed over my backyard while I was using the plunge pool. At the time, I had figured it was some neighbor's kid messing around, maybe doing Karen's dirty work. I'd snatched it out of the air when it hovered too low and locked it in my garage. I'd almost forgotten about it. "You flew it over my yard," I said. The kid nodded. "Karen paid me $50. Said you were hiding something. Told me to get pictures." I blinked. Not because I was surprised, but because of how tired that made me feel. Even gone, her shadow still lingered. I didn't mean to spy or anything. I just thought it was, a dumb job. Easy money. But then my mom told me you were a vet, and she got real mad when she found out what I did. She said I needed to come here myself. I stared at the broken drone. He looked down at it too, like he wanted to throw it in the bushes and run. "You got a name?" I asked. "Caleb." I nodded slowly. "All right, Caleb, I don't need the drone, but you're not off the hook either." His shoulders tensed. "You gonna call my parents?" "No," I said. "You're gonna help me fix that fence." His eyes widened. "Seriously? You want to make it right. You're gonna sweat a little." So the next morning, Caleb showed up. Baggy shirt, sunburn, already forming on his neck. I handed him a hammer and pointed to the sagging panel on the side yard that had taken a hit during last winter's storms. He didn't complain, just started pulling nails. At first, we worked in silence. I wasn't interested in making him uncomfortable. I just wanted him to understand that what he did mattered, that spying on someone even under orders isn't harmless, especially when that someone is barely holding their piece together. Eventually, he spoke. My dad was Navy, he said. Never talks about it, not ever. Some don't, I replied. That doesn't mean they aren't carrying it. He looked up at me then. Is that why you have the pool? I nodded. Yeah. He kept working more focused now. Over the next few weekends, he kept showing up. At first, I figured he felt guilty and wanted to earn some sort of forgiveness. But after a while, it turned into something else. We'd talk about small stuff, football school, what I planted in the yard. He asked about the Navy one day, and I told him just enough to keep it real without scaring him. He asked about Karen too. Wanted to know why someone would hate a pool so much. She didn't hate the pool, I said. She hated losing control. He nodded slowly like he understood more than he probably should at that age. A month in, he brought over his bike, which had a busted chain. I helped him fix it. He told me his dad didn't really know how to fix things. He used to, Caleb said, but now he mostly just sits inside, gets mad a lot. That stuck with me. So I asked Caleb if his dad would ever want to stop by. Just casual, no pressure, not therapy, just a cup of coffee on the porch. 3 days later, a man in his 40s showed up. Worn jeans, eyes that looked past things instead of at them. He didn't say much, but he shook my hand, sat down, took the coffee, watched the trees move in the wind for a long time before saying anything. I heard you served, he said. I did. Same. 2 tours. Not as long as you. I nodded. We didn't talk about war. We didn't need to, just sat in silence for the better part of an hour. When he stood up to leave, he said, I didn't know there were others around here who understood. There are, I said. We just don't wear it on our sleeves. After that, he came by once a week, sometimes alone, sometimes with Caleb. One time he brought steaks and we grilled on the patio. Word got around like it always does in neighborhoods, that the guy with the pool was helping kids with bikes, that his backyard wasn't a fortress anymore, that veterans sometimes came by and they'd sit for a while and just exist without anyone needing anything from them. The plunge pool became a quiet symbol, not of defiance but of invitation. That fence Caleb helped fix. He signed the last plank with his initials tucked low where no one would see them unless they looked. He came by less as school got busy, but once before football practice he dropped off a note. Thanks for teaching me how to repair stuff, not just the fence. That one I kept. In the end, the drone didn't matter. The pictures, the spying, even Karen's money, none of that stayed with him. What did was learning that when you break something, you fix it. Not with apologies, with effort, with presence. That was the side story no one saw. No meeting minutes, no headlines. Just 2 people, different generations, each carrying invisible weight and finding a little balance in the act of building something back together. And that, I think, was its own kind of justice.